Hi, everybody. Today's Friday, October 3rd, 2025, and our dear friend, Ambassador Chas Freeman, joins us. Welcome, Ambassador.
Glad to be back with you, Nima.
Yeah. Ambassador, many people are so confused about the meeting that Pete Hegseth, together with Donald Trump, had with the American generals and admirals, and they say that the performance was somehow bizarre, and Pete Hegseth talking to generals. What was that? Do you think the main goal of the meeting was the domestic policy? What's going on under Trump? Because Donald Trump said it's a training ground for the army to go in the cities in the United States to learn how to fight, to go outside and fighting other enemies outside of the United States. What is your take on what is happening?
Well, I think there were multiple aspects of that. It was indeed a very bizarre gathering, unprecedented, really. And both the speech by President Trump, which was pretty incoherent, but very threatening toward political opponents of one sort or another, and toward cities that he mischaracterized as convulsed by crime. And also Secretary Hegseth basically trying to impose his, some people would call toxic masculinity on the assembled troops. But the question really is, why was this meeting held? And the best explanation that I've seen was passed on by Larry Johnson. And that is that this was cover for calling back CENTCOM commanders for an attack on Iran. That is to say, if Hegseth and Trump had simply called back the commanders in the Persian Gulf, then that would have signaled that an attack was imminent. But if they called back everybody, the attention of the world would be elsewhere. And this, therefore, was a deception. That is a possibility, because it does appear that aerial tankers and other equipment, aircraft carriers and the like, have been moving in the direction of the Persian Gulf. And as we've discussed before, and Trita Parsi has most eloquently explained, Israel has reasons to want to attack Iran earlier rather than later. So I think the JCPOA is finished on October 18th. While it exists, there is arguably some basis, even though China and Russia disagree with the so-called snapback provisions, there is at least some basis to hold Iran to the terms of that agreement. But after the 18th of October, there won't be.
First time Israel attacked Iran, it was somehow a surprise attack. And the main goal was regime change in Iran. Looking at Iran today, I compare it to what it was before October 7th. Those people who were criticizing the government because of the policies inside the country, they were not happy with the policies. And I see those people today totally supporting the government in Iran. And they have changed in some cases 180 degrees.
Yes, I think that the net effect of the several attacks, actually 3 Israeli attacks on Iran, in one way or another, starting with the assassination, the murder of Ismail Haniyeh. I think the effect of these has been to rally Iranian nationalists behind the government and to cement support for the regime, which, as you indicated, many people disliked, but they now see it as essential to sustaining Iran's independence sense of pride and identity against attack by Israel, joined by the United States. So I think, yes, the effect has been totally the opposite of what Israel wanted. And there's no reason to expect that more warfare will produce a different result.
If the attack in the first place has failed, and what can they bring to the new attack? I don't know if the United States is prepared to start the war together with the United States, or they're gonna join it later on, or what's your take on that? And what Israel can get through these sort of attacks on Iran? I don't see the invasion of Tehran on the ground. They're not gonna go in that direction. Just gonna be aerial bomb. The fighter is going in the airspace of Iran, bombing the targets that they have in their mind. But beyond that, what would be the benefit for Israel?
Very hard for me to see any benefit other than the usual one of distracting everybody in Israel from the isolation that Israel is suffering and the opprobrium in which their prime minister Netanyahu is held globally, including very much now in the United States. There was an absolutely remarkable interview by Tucker Carlson of Jeff Sachs, very significant, very hard-hitting expression of American nationalists, the resentment of control by the Israel lobby and Prime Minister Netanyahu's ability to manipulate President Trump. So this would be a distraction. But as far as what it might do in Iran, I can't say. The Israelis are very devious and clever, and they may have come up with some new angle. Perhaps they've discovered where the enriched uranium went and are going after that. Of course, everything they're doing is in fact increasing the likelihood that Iran, despite the pledge of President Pezeshkian, will in fact go nuclear because Israel and the United States are together eliminating all means of defending Iran other than a nuclear deterrent. So they're making it more likely rather than less, despite the stated intent. But I don't see what this does. I have to say that if indeed, as I've heard, aircraft carriers moving in the direction of the Persian Gulf and tankers are assembling and so forth, this does not necessarily signal an American participation in an Israeli attack on Iran, because the defense of Israel cannot be accomplished without American support. And so this may all be preparatory to dealing with a predicted Iranian counterstrike. And here again, as I think Peter Parthy has most clearly expressed, if there is an attack on Iran by Israel, as Iran appears to expect, then I don't think the Iranians will be anywhere near as restrained, or even restrained at all, in their counterattack on Israel. So it's a very moment fraught with a lot of danger.
The interview that you mentioned that Tucker Carlson had with Jeffrey Sachs, in which he said that during the 12-day war, Israelis in Washington were just moving around and just issuing orders to the people in Washington. And looking at the Trump administration and considering what we had with the Biden administration, it seems that the Trump administration is much worse than the Biden administration in terms of obeying what Netanyahu is ordering.
That is the case. I mean, Joe Biden and his administration were classically devoted to Israel along the lines of traditional American politicians. President Trump is far more extreme, and the people around him are far more extreme in their obedience to Israeli direction. And, I think it's a fair thing to say that for decades, people in the Pentagon have feared the arrival of anyone from Israel. And I remember when I was Assistant Secretary of Defense, that when the Chief of Staff of the Israeli Armed Forces was coming to the Pentagon, everybody tried to nail their desk to the floor so that it wouldn't be stolen. And there was great resentment of the fact that Israel demanded things but never gave anything. And that is very much the character of the relationship to this day. And I think Tucker Carlson's tirade against Israel was quite justified.
Yeah. The other sensitive issue during the talk was the Al-Aqsa mosque. He said that they want to destroy the Al-Aqsa mosque and build a temple or rebuild the temple instead of what that would be hugely. And considering the Al-Aqsa mosque, I somehow feel I understand how the Muslim people think about the Al-Aqsa
Of
mosque. That
course.
would be hugely consequential.
Well, that's a very complicated issue, and as you indicate, one of great emotional importance to Muslims everywhere, not just in the Middle East. It is the third most holy site in Islam for pilgrimage. And it is the project of rebuilding the temple, which actually may not have been on the Temple Mount. And there's some disagreement among archaeologists about whether that, in fact, was the site of the Jewish temple that they proposed to rebuild. There are two main groups devoted to that project. One is, of course, the Zealots, the extremists in religious Messianic Zionists who are devoted to this idea. This is why Itamar Ben-Gvir periodically leads expeditions to the mosque and defiles it, basically, by entering it and by disturbing Muslim worship there. But the other project is that of evangelical Christians, because there is a passage in the book of Revelations which suggests that rebuilding the temple and conducting the sacrifice of a red heifer, meaning a young cow with reddish hair, would end the world, would bring about the end of days and the second coming of the Messiah, and that all Christians would be lifted up to heaven, and Jews would all be either exterminated or forcibly converted to Christianity. So on the one hand, you have Messianic Zionists. On the other hand, you have evangelical Christians who have a very anti-Semitic objective, namely doing away with the world's Jews, but doing it in the name of Zionism. So they are Zionist anti-Semites, a very interesting phenomenon. Anyway, I'm not a believer in either project, but I agreed with Jeffrey Sachs, who answered the question in that interview by pointing out that this would be a global earthquake. There are 2 billion members of the Muslim faith in various schools around the world. Every one of them would be touched by this. It's not as though Israel hasn't done enough to be hated. This would have cataclysmic effects. And here I'll just mention, I may have mentioned before, the classic answer of the late King Abdullah to a group from New York who asked him to be nice to Israel and implied that somehow that would benefit Saudi Arabia. I was in the room sitting with his advisors because I had a meeting with him after this group left. And I was listening to it. And the head of the group, a very decent man, but very committed to Israel, Jewish, leaned over to the king and said, you must be nice to Israel. And Abdullah, who didn't want to talk about this issue at all, he wanted to talk about economic reform in Saudi Arabia, replied, I have a message for you, Israel. You can take it to your friends in Israel. And the fellow from New York was thrilled. He was going to be an important intermediary, a breakthrough moment in Saudi-Israeli relations. And Abdullah said, tell them, if they want to be loved, they should do something lovable. And the fact is, they've done the opposite. They have done hateful things, and therefore they are hated. And I don't think there's anything that could make them more hated than to interfere with the Al-Aqsa mosque. And in fact, at the moment, because there are tunnels underneath the mosque, which they claim are for archaeological research purposes. This is very controversial because many Muslims believe that this is an effort to undermine the mosque and structurally weaken it so that it will collapse. I don't know whether that's a justified concern or not, but no, that project would have cataclysmic effects.
Is there anybody in Washington, in your opinion, right now, that would somehow go against Israel, somehow decide that what Israel is doing is not correct? I'm talking about the Trump administration. Donald Trump himself, it doesn't seem that he's that much aware of what's going on.
I don't see anyone in the administration who is not subservient to the Zionist lobby and to Israel. So I think there's no evidence that there is any independence at all from Mr. Netanyahu, who is a master manipulator. And there are all sorts of questions about there's an obvious motivation for people to cuddle up to Israel and defend it, and that is money, campaign contributions. But there are also suspicions that there may be intelligence issues and scandals, perhaps connected to Jeffrey Epstein and the Epstein files, which are still missing from publication, but more and more little bits and pieces come out, which are very suggestive. So we don't know, but I can say one thing, and that is privately, many people in Washington despise Israel. Publicly, they love it. So it is a cause of great hypocrisy. People are basically scared. And, I've been attacked by the Israel lobby. I was also attacked by the Taiwan lobby. But the difference is this, when the Taiwan lobby beats you up, it feels like you've had a feather duster all over you, and you have no bruises. And you think to yourself, what have I done to be attacked by such nice people? But when the Israel lobby attacks you, you have bruises everywhere, and you loathe them. You loathe them. You really detest them. And there are many people in Washington who have suffered from smear jobs, had their character impugned, lies told about them in order to counter criticism of Israel. So I think Israel's in a more precarious situation than some in that country understand. They're losing the United States as a backer. And they're losing the United States which is the last main significant backer of them. I mean, in the UN General Assembly vote on the question of Palestine as a state, two-state solution, if you will, the Saudi-French initiative, your neighbor, Paraguay, voted for Israel. Your neighbor, Brazil, Argentina, voted for Israel. So did Israel and the United States. The others are all microstates, subject to American dominion or basically for sale. Nauru is often mentioned in that connection. It basically votes where the money is. So Israel is totally isolated now, and it's losing the United States as its last significant backer.
We had Netanyahu coming out and talking about TikTok and X and how they're trying to do everything to dominate the public opinion in these social medias. But when you look at the survey by New York Times, it shows that 7 out of 10 Americans, young Americans under 30, they're totally against economic and military aid to Israel. And that they're not going to be able to change that.
Well, Larry Ellison, who is the richest man in the world now, having displaced Elon Musk, is one of the main purchasers, along with a number of other billionaire Zionists of TikTok. Ironically, of course, TikTok's even before this latest, still incomplete deal. TikTok was largely owned by American investors in ByteDance. Now it will be owned by a larger group of American investors who are all determined to alter the algorithm so that TikTok is complementary to Israel. I don't know how that will work. Maybe they have some technical solution that I can't currently imagine. But the beauty of TikTok has been that it provides raw information. And the raw information has played a major role in revealing the war crimes of Israel in Palestine and the genocide in Gaza. And I don't know how TikTok can be a viable platform if somehow the raw truth cannot be published on it. So I'm not sure how this is going to work, but it's very important to understand that the reason people went after TikTok was not because of the Chinese ownership or the fear that it would collect information on Americans for China, which was the stated reason. The real reason was it has played a major role in turning young Americans against Zionism.
And he decided to go after the far left and far right. He even called the far right the file rack. And he's talking about the Nazis, and these are Nazis. And is that going to help Israel? Is that going to help to improve? Because they feel they're threatened by these people in their mind, because the main base of Israel is among the Republican Party, basically. And if this sort of new attitude on the part of the Republican people like Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, even the late Charlie Kirk has changed his mind before being assassinated. It is a movement within the right-wing party. They're so much afraid of it, but putting all together and saying that we are prepared to fight them, is that going to put Israel in a better position?
No, I think this is actually what I think that Netanyahu understands the United States quite well, having grown up in Philadelphia and spent many years in New York and Washington. I think he is very, very much afraid. He sees the ebb tide of support for Israel as very significant. And he said in that meeting that you're quoting, he said this is the most important thing there is, because he understands that without American support, Israel can't survive. It would not survive for more than a week without the backing of the United States. And so this is of vital importance to him and to the Zionist cause. So, yeah, he's unnerved. He's panicked, really. And he doesn't help things by saying the sorts of things he does, just bald-faced lies. There's no starvation in Gaza. Israel is generously feeding Palestinians. There's no attack on journalists, and so forth and so on. Things like the interception of the Samud flotilla also have an impact. There were people from all over the world in that fleet of yachts. Israel is just demonstrating that it is global enemy number one now.
Donald Trump is so optimistic about his peace plan, his so-called peace plan. Here is what he said.
Done 7 wars. We put out 7 wars. Now it could be 8. You reported. You were there yesterday. It looks like the Middle East could very well be solved after 3,000 years approximately. We're going to have more than Gaza. We're going to have Gaza plus peace, overall peace. That would be an amazing achievement. And then we'll get Russia taken care of somehow. We're going to get that. I thought that would be an easy one. That's been a difficult one.
Yeah.
Well, what to say? I mean, first of all, there's not 3,000 years of conflict in the Middle East. There's about a century and a little over a century of conflict. Second, the so-called peace plan is not a peace plan. It's a surrender ultimatum to Hamas. Third, that so-called peace plan was discussed with a group of Arab countries, and its main element was that Israel would withdraw from Gaza, and they approved it. And then it was renegotiated by Netanyahu and Ron Dermer, his right-hand man in an American-born Israeli who was ambassador to Washington. And that clause about Israel withdrawing was turned on its head. Israel is going to stay. But, finally, this is a peace plan that was never discussed with the Palestinians, who have to have something to say about peace. Either they benefit from peace or they don't. There's no benefit to them in this plan. None. And so basically, they're being faced with the same old demands from Israel: exile yourself, leave, or be killed. So I think anybody who looks at this is aghast. And finally, I would just note that Qatar, which has been the intermediary in discussions between the Palestinians and Israelis, is furious to have been deprived of that role, and also to have been betrayed. What they agreed to with Donald Trump is not what Donald Trump announced. He unilaterally, under pressure from the Israelis, changed its main terms. So this is not a peace plan, and it's not going to produce peace. I don't see any reason to believe that Hamas is any more eager to commit suicide today than it was a week ago. I did not take issue with the 7 wars that Donald Trump has ended, but I don't think many people agree with that is what has happened either.
It seems that they have 2 versions of the peace plan. One of them was sent to the Arab states. One of them is what Netanyahu has decided to modify to reshape. And Pakistanis were talking about this. And how is that going? Do you think that Donald Trump is accepting what Netanyahu? Because you see 2 versions of the peace plan, and how you can. Because at the end of the day, you have to convince the Arab states about what you're talking about. How you can do that?
Well, it's not possible. I mean, basically, as I said, Donald Trump and Stephen Witkoff have dishonored themselves in the eyes of the Arabs. They're not trusted because they reached an agreement, apparently. The Arabs said that there were many positive elements in it. They assumed it would be negotiated, but it was instead modified to remove the elements that the Arab states had demanded and promulgated as a unilateral ultimatum to Hamas. No consultation and I think the final insult is the apparent effort to install Tony Blair as the governor of Gaza. He is despised by Palestinians for his previous role. He's despised in the Middle East for his participation with George W. Bush in promulgation of false intelligence and the invasion of Iraq. So you couldn't come up with a worse nominee for this position. But the basic fact is that this is an exercise in colonial rule. There's no consultation at all with the people who are most affected, namely the Palestinians. They continue to be subjected to genocide. So what is this? It is an instance of performative politics staged for the benefit of the Zionist constituency in the United States and in Israel. And it has no credibility at all anywhere else. So it's an exercise in futility, but it's done grave damage to the reputation of both Donald Trump and Stephen Witkoff. And I don't think further efforts by them to mediate are going to be very welcome. I guess I'd say one last thing here, and that is that while after the so-called peace plan was modified to meet Israeli demands, the Arab participants issued a unilateral statement in which they reiterated all of the demands that they have always had for Palestinian self-determination, the withdrawal of Israel from Gaza, and of course they don't like Hamas. That is a fact for many reasons. Mostly, I have to say, because Hamas is a democratic institution, part of the Muslim Brotherhood, and they don't like democracy because that is not their constitutional order. They are all autocracies to one degree or another. I mean, they may be benign autocracies, but they're nonetheless one man, one family rule, not ruled by the voice of the people directly. So this is just confused things more. And it's done nothing at all for the Palestinians, nothing at all. I mean, even Mahmoud Abbas, who is the contractor to the Israelis and the Americans in managing security in the West Bank, was not consulted. No Palestinian was consulted. So whatever this is, it's purely an Israeli-American unilateral move.
And the concerning part is that it says that Israel can reactivate the war on Gaza anytime they want to do.
This has been the thing that Israel has always inserted into every ceasefire agreement, that basically they can resume their war crimes at will. Well, you know, now I have to say that despite issuing that statement, the Arab countries that had discussed this with Donald Trump, President Trump, have done nothing concrete. The UAE in particular has not altered its relationship with Israel. And in fact, some anonymous officials from the United Arab Emirates have suggested that even if Israel were to annex the West Bank, which Donald Trump says he opposes, they would not break relations with Israel. They would sustain the Abraham Accords. That suggests that there's a lot of benefit flowing under the table but who knows?
We had in Financial Times, they reported that Britain is already assisting Ukraine in carrying out strikes deep inside Russian territory. And today we've learned from NBC that the United States, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, has told agencies to share intelligence with Zelensky administration to help guide long-range missiles and drone strikes on Russian energy infrastructure. Where are we heading, in your opinion, with the case?
Well, there's a clear escalation going on. This has been the pattern, of course. Let me say a few things. First of all, there's nothing new about the American involvement in providing intelligence support to Ukrainian strikes on the Russians, including, or the British for that matter. The British have been far more involved in this for far longer than anyone else. And in fact, they are engaged in quite an active set of covert actions to weaken and isolate Russia, including, for example, in the state of Georgia, which is a neighbor of the Russians. They're very active trying to engage in regime change there. They were active, as was the EU, in the recent Moldovan elections. So there's nothing new about this. What is arguably sort of new, not really, is that the Trump administration reacts to Russian resistance to its demands by escalating both the rhetoric and the support. So President Trump can no longer say this isn't his war. It is his war, very much his war. I note that all this is taking place in a context where there's hysteria in Europe about alleged Russian drones. Some of them actually, the operators of the drones have been identified, and they weren't Russians. I think some of them were Germans, and there are others. And I think at Valdai, President Putin actually joked about this. He asked whether Russia had drones that could reach Lisbon, because Russian drones are appearing everywhere, like unidentified flying objects, UFOs, So, and this is pretty clearly part of a campaign to drum up support in Europe for the continuation of the war in Ukraine. Some countries, like Denmark, are basically in a panic. I just read that in Denmark, camping equipment, meaning canned goods and other things that you take with you when you don't have access to the supplies from a supermarket or a store, 4 times now. The sales have gone up, have quadrupled. So the campaign to alarm everyone is having its effect. I don't see any evidence that this is, in fact, a Russian initiative. It very much seems to me to be consistent with false flag operations. And there's actually a rumor that Ukraine plans a major false flag operation staging an alleged Russian invasion of Poland, which would, in fact, alarm everybody even more. So Ukraine is desperate. It's run out of manpower. Its army is crumbling. It's having to reduce the age of conscription. There are tens of thousands of deserters. Its casualties have been enormous. It's not able to replace the number of men killed and wounded with new recruits. Its army is shrinking, and it's desperate. And therefore, we see all of these efforts being made to increase the level of alarm about Russia in other European countries and cement support for the continuation of the war. But that isn't going to help Ukraine or Ukrainians at all.
He said that Ukraine has lost Putin said Ukraine has lost more than 44,000 soldiers in September alone.
Yes, I think, and I never thought I would say this of a Russian leader, but I think there's every reason to believe his figures are accurate. If you listened at all to parts of that, his discussion at Valdai, you have to be impressed with his command of detail about what's happening at the front, where the troops are, who's doing what to whom, what the casualties are, and so forth. And it's not a surprise that the Russians have been winning in Ukraine. And it's a surprise, perhaps, that they've been so methodical and taken their time. They don't seem to be in a hurry. And if indeed the casualties on the Ukrainian side are, as President Putin claimed, then one wonders how much longer Ukraine can carry on.
Keith Kellogg said that he was told by senior officials in Washington that Russia cannot win. And do you feel that these people, senior officials, they do study what's going on in Ukraine? They know what's going on there? Are they military officials? Are they political officials?
Well, I think they're officials who are getting their information mainly from Fox News and other media that are passionately devoted to anti-Russian causes, and which, distort the facts very significantly. President Trump has a once-a-week intelligence briefing, apparently, on Thursdays, I believe, and it doesn't seem to do anything to alter replace his main source of information, which is Fox News. I think this war has been characterized by the most intensive information warfare we've ever seen by a supine media that basically acts as a scribe for the government, does not accept contrary opinion, which is unquestioning, which just takes government handouts, which ultimately are based on propaganda from Ukraine, rather than an investigation of the facts, for granted. So delusions abound. This is the prospect of Ukrainian success at this point. Even The Economist magazine, which has been very staunchly optimistic about Ukraine, has come to the conclusion that this can't go on.
He mentioned about Tomahawk missiles because they were talking about we may send Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. And everybody knows that the threat of Tomahawk missiles is that they can carry nuclear bomb. And that's why it's important. And Putin said that is not going to change the battlefield, the reality of the battlefield. But what is of concern is that without the United States, they're not going to be capable to use them. It seems everything should be American, everything to use.
Well, the Tomahawk really can't be effectively operated except with American direct guidance and support. So that is why this is would be such a significant escalation, an overt American role at long-range strikes into Russia. And it's very clear that President Zelensky wants to attack Moscow as directly and as massively as he can in order to destroy Russian morale. My guess is that if he did actually succeeded at that, as in the case of Iran, it would have the opposite effect. It would strengthen support for the war among ordinary Russians. But anyway, let's hope that never happens. But the counter escalation, I think, would be very significant. President Putin was quite vague about exactly how Russia would respond to something like that. But he was quite clear that they would respond. Let me make a basic point, agreeing with the statement by President Putin that you quoted, namely, this won't have any effect on the battlefield. The battlefield is in Ukraine. It is not in Russia. And the incursion in Kursk is gone. The Russian homeland is being attacked by Ukraine. The damage is being done particularly to refineries and so forth, and occasionally to ammunition dumps. That's not insignificant in terms of support for the war, but it isn't the war. The war is taking place in eastern and southern Ukraine. And he's right. If you hurt Russia, that isn't going to alter the advance of the Russians in Ukraine, which continues, as he said, on pretty much across the entire front, which is a huge one. Ukraine is a very large country indeed, and it may have lost 20% of its territory, but the remaining 80% is still the largest country in Europe.
He, in terms of the drones, he said, you've mentioned the possibility of false flag operation in Europe, but in his view, in Putin's view, the main objective is to militarize Europe. And Ambassador, you're looking at Europe today, looking at the situation, the economy of Europe today, the way that they lost Nord Stream pipeline, they lost the Siberia 2, going from Russia to China instead of going to Europe. What gamble is this in Ukraine that it has no end in the mind of European leaders?
Well, they're not thinking strategically or long term. They don't really know what to do. We've discussed this before. They have put forward no vision for Europe, no peace plan, no basis for coexistence with Russia, no answer to what happens to Ukraine after the war is over, which will end at some point. How much of Ukraine will be left is a big question. Some of it will be left, of course. And so they don't have a strategy. And what they're doing, which is a combination of economic austerity and military expansion, rearmament, isn't going to solve their basic problem. As you indicated, they've lost their access to cheap energy supplies from Russia, which was central to the competitiveness, particularly of German industry. The French have a very effective nuclear power supply for electrification, so they are less affected by this. But Europe is stagnant. The world's center of science and technology is emigrating to China. Europeans are going to China because they can get funding and facilities there that they can't get in Europe and they can't get in the United States. There's a large brain drain going on in the United States of scientists, engineers, mathematicians, and so on. And in fact, there was a poll which suggested that 3 out of 4 American scientists are thinking about or have thought about emigrating, leaving the country, because they don't believe that the Trump administration is anything but hostile to scientific research and development. And so Europeans are not providing an answer to their own children, their grandchildren, of how Europe is going to carry on. Europe is a great civilization, a collection of countries with common values and enormous achievements historically. It's squandering that heritage. It's not building on it. It's allowing it to decay. And I guess a final observation, and that is rearming Europe, which the Europeans are doing, and increasing defense spending. The French have come up against popular opinion in an effort to do that, but the Germans are still going ahead. Some countries like Spain very sensibly are not pursuing this, but it just there are two consequences of this. This is a hedge against American abandonment. That is, if the United States really does withdraw from Europe to the extent that President Trump sometimes indicates he would like to do, then Europeans will have a means of defending themselves that is self-reliant. So that is a hedge. But the other side of that is that they will be less beholden to the United States. They will be less subject to American blackmail and pressure, and they will be more able to develop independent policies. They're not developing independent policies at this point. There's that dreadful scene in the Oval Office with President Trump seated behind his desk and all the European vassal states sitting there contritely while Giorgia Meloni rolled her eyes at the whole scene, illustrates. So Europe is adrift. We have an election coming up in Czechia, and it's not sure that whether the Czechs will remain behind Ukraine or abandon it, join Hungary and Slovakia in opposing the continuation of the war. And Europe has not come to grips with either the genocide in Palestine or the war in Ukraine and its strategic consequences. And it suffered from both. The credibility of the West globally is at its lowest point since before Columbus went to the Bahamas for a vacation.
Ambassador, it seems that Donald Trump and let's assume the whole West wants to compete with China, but one of the key issues that you've mentioned, the brain drain that is happening right now, it seems to me that would be the most important issue in terms of competing with China, but nobody's talking about it in the mainstream media.
Yeah, no, in the mainstream, that's quite absolutely correct. I've been talking about this for a decade because you cannot become competitive by erecting a tariff wall and protecting your industry from competition. You cannot reindustrialize if you refuse to accept foreign investment. You cannot maintain a lead in science and technology if you do not collaborate with others beyond your borders. And as I've pointed out, and others have too, China now has over 1/4 of the world's STEM workforce, scientists, technologists, engineers, and mathematicians. And it's very innovative. And it is said by those who study these things to be in the lead in almost all technologies now. There are a few that the United States still leads. There are a couple that South Korea leads. But other than that, 57 of the 64 technology types that the Australian Strategic Policy Institute evaluates see the Chinese in the lead. So, and I just saw Tsinghua University, which is the MIT of China, has been called that, is now #1 in the world in computer science. So, and the third and fourth best are other Chinese universities, Jiao Tong in Shanghai and Beijing University in Beijing. So what we're seeing is a shift. We've seen a shift in the global center of economic gravity to somewhere in Pacific Asia, including Japan, Korea, China. Now others are joining in that, Indonesia, for example. And now we're seeing a shift in the center of gravity of technology development. to the same region with the same countries. This is epical. You can't deal with this in the manner that President Trump has tried to deal with it, like the famous King Canute in England, whose staff persuaded him that he could turn the tide back. And so he went and sat in a chair on the beach, and the tide almost drowned him because it wouldn't obey his commands. There are trends at work economically, scientifically, technologically, that cannot be gainsaid. They exist. They will persist. There is nothing you can do to stop them. Cutting off Chinese student registration in the United States at a moment when China has now got universities that are as good or better than American universities isn't going to do anything but accelerate internal development in China. So, and you see the world's scientists gravitating there. Every day there's a report of some noted expert from the UK, Germany, France, America, even in South America, who goes to China to work because that's where the other talented people now are together, and collaboration is how everything advances. So, well, I mean, we've seen brain drains before. Actually, I think you are the product of one. It's not new, but the scale is new, and the direction of immigration is new.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for being with us today.
Well, thank you, and have a wonderful weekend.